TC3 students, welcome to another episode of Cooking with Miles and Jenae. Today we have Imitaji and Gavin Idolite. So, how about you two tell us where you go to school and what grade you're in? Emma, go first.
I'm homeschooled. I do everything online.
Oh yeah?
I'm in 12th grade, my senior year. Almost done.
Almost finished? There we go. Love it.
And I go to John Carroll, and I'm a freshman.
And his voice is about as deep as a senior in college. So, welcome you two. We're so glad that you're with us today. Today we are making beef stew. Now, this recipe isn't complex at all, but we add a little something different. Now, you at home, you probably have chunks of beef. Well, today we are actually using moose, which Jenae calls mystery meat. So shout out to the Shoups for giving us the moose meat for today's episode. And actually, you're gonna need the rest of the ingredients for today. So why don't you check this graphic out? Now, the first thing that you're gonna wanna do is make sure that you get a half a cup of flour, and you're gonna take a little bit of salt and pepper, and you're gonna take that flour and dump it into a Ziploc bag. Please make sure that it's a Ziploc bag. And then after that, you're gonna take your meat and you're gonna dump it. I'm really scared that I'm gonna mess this up. Yeah. Let's, teamwork makes the dream work. You're gonna dump your meat into the flour. Oh yeah, yes, we did it. All right, perfect. You wanna put this in?
Yes.
Sweet, awesome, teamwork's amazing. So you're gonna zip the Ziploc, all right, safety first, and then you're gonna shake the meat all around and make sure that the flour gets all throughout the meat. Now, with the salt and pepper, you wanna make sure that you season your flour, because if not, then it's just gonna be bland tasting flour. So nobody really wants that.
It's like chicken tenders.
Yeah.
But moose tenders.
Now, as I do this and as the flour totally coats the meat, I'm gonna go back to the stove in just a moment and I'm gonna heat up some olive oil, and then we're gonna put the meat in the olive oil and let that cook and get browned off. Well, as I do that, Jenae, you wanna share with us what we're gonna talk about today?
Let's do it. Okay, so first of all, question for you guys. Have you ever had a season in life where it was kind of like an in-between season? Like, or a filler season, like you felt like, oh, there's not really much going on right now, it's just an in-between seasons. What was that like? Right now, exactly, yep, right now, for both of you. Good, correct answer, guys. So that's kind of like the season that we're in right now with Corona. It's kind of this in-between season, just like all these emotions probably going through your head of like, okay, is this a waste of time? Am I growing during this time? Is it even stretching me? I wish this time would just go away. A whole bunch of emotions that we're feeling. I kind of had a filler in-between time that is different than the one I'm feeling now, but it was in between my high school years and then college years. I had a gap year. And when I was a senior in high school, like you, Emma, I wanted to do anything to not have a gap year because I wanted to go straight to university. And I did not want to be one of those people that had an in-between season, because God forbid I have an in-between season that I felt like just didn't really matter that much. But the truth is I had this in-between season and I ended up working a lot, building a lot of relationships I didn't think I would build, and just trying to make money so that I could go to college. But the crazy thing is that at the end of this year, I realized, okay, like without this year, I would not have grown into the person that I was at the end of it. It was actually pivotal, and if I hadn't actually applied myself and I thought it was just a waste of time, I never would have been the person I wanted to be at the end of it. And truth be told, if I didn't go through that gap year, I would have not met Miles,
Yeah.
which is important, and I would have gone to Liberty where I ended up going to school. And so that gap year was actually one of the most vital times of my life. And I want to say to you guys that this quarantine time is also that same kind of thing. If you apply yourself and you're really like, okay, I'm gonna try to be the kind of person that I wanna be and get stretched during this time, it can be one of the most vital times. Or if you're like, whatever, it can be like the biggest waste of time ever. And so another person that went through an in-between season, and quite possibly the longest in-between season, is David, who we actually talked about a few weeks ago, but we're gonna talk about a different aspect of his life. But David was literally anointed as king, as a shepherd, and like teenage years, and then went through all of these seasons, defeated a giant. You guys know that story, led an army, literally was playing like a lyre, a baby harp for the king, knowing he was going to be king. And then we get to kind of where we're at in our passage of scripture today. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about kind of all the emotions that David experienced during this in between from I'm going to be king to actually becoming king season, and that those emotions are the same emotions that we're feeling right now in the season, whether that's sadness, fear, loneliness, joy sometimes, like, yeah, no school, no, like school online. So all these emotions that we're feeling up and down, how David experienced those, and then the next few weeks we're going to be looking at how he responded so that we can kind of respond the same way he did. So that brings us to the text of scripture that we're going to be studying today, and it is 1 Samuel 18, 6 through 11. So this is where we pick up in the story, and we're going to kind of be talking about how David responded to this crazy scenario. So it says, as the troops were coming back, when David was returning from killing the Philistine, so that's Goliath, the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with tambourines, with shouts of joy, and with 3-stringed instruments. As they danced, the women sang, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Saul was furious and resented this song. They credited tens of thousands to David, he complained, but only credited me with thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul watched David jealously from that day forward. The next day, an evil spirit sent from God came powerfully on Saul, and he began to rave inside the palace. He was raving inside the palace, guys. David was playing the lyre as usual, but Saul was holding a spear, and he threw it, thinking, I'll pin David to the wall. But David got away from him twice. So that's what we're going to be looking at, this crazy situation where David is a ninja and got away from spears. So Miles, you want to talk about what we're talking about next?
Yeah, so before we go to our next point, I'm going to ask you guys to do some cutting for us, all right? Woo! So Gavin, can you start cutting that carrot? You're going to cut it into slices. Actually, just like what you're about to do is perfect. All right, so thin slices, perfect. Now, you don't want to have your fingers just like out so you can cut yourself. Try and like put them like this, and that way, yeah, exactly. That way you don't cut yourself. Emma, you have the crying job, which is actually pretty entertaining for all of us because these onions are quite strong. Jenae and I cut some of them earlier. So we're probably all going to be crying by the end of this. So you're going to go ahead and cut those really, really, really fine. All right. And then once you're done with that first onion, you're going to finish these two. And that first onion can go in this bowl right there. All right. So the cool thing about this recipe is it actually needs to simmer for a little while. Oh yeah, Jenae's gonna cut that celery too. This recipe needs to simmer for a bit, but you guys are in luck because we already have had a pot simmering for a little bit and this pot is done. So I'm gonna go ahead into this pot that's already finished and ready to go and add the potatoes and the onions, which Gavin is why you're cutting 3, and carrots. Coming through, my lord. So we're gonna add this to the pot, and then this is gonna simmer as we make the one from scratch and let this finish up. What we'll do with this one is this will simmer for about 45 minutes with the carrots, the other 2 onions, and 2 medium-sized potatoes. And this will simmer in here for about 45 minutes or really until the potatoes are done and complete. Now, if you don't like onions, you don't have to use 3. You can use 1, you can use 2, or you can use none. But honestly, they're gonna cut down and they're gonna give this thing a really, really, really good flavor. It's gonna be amazing. So we're gonna stir that all in there, and I'm gonna put the top back on, and we're gonna let this thing simmer for another 45 minutes. Now,
let's do it.
Let's dive into this story about David. So, David gets 2 spears thrown at him, right? Can you imagine sitting in the palace with a king? The king has brought you into his palace because he's like, you know what? I'm stressed out. I need somebody that can play music really, really well. And so David is brought into his palace to play this small, teeny, tiny harp for him. I kind of think about it as like, you know, the little tiny violin that somebody plays when you're complaining and they really care about how you know, about what you are complaining about. Well, that's what I think about this tiny harp that David's playing for Saul. And as he's playing this tiny harp, Saul is having a fit. Right? And so Saul is getting upset as David's trying to play this nice music for him. And as he's getting upset, David is watching this happen. And as he watches it happen, Saul picks up a spear and chucks it at David. And I can only imagine this harp falling to the ground. And then obviously David trying to evade these two spears being thrown at him, which actually I think is pretty awesome. I feel like Emma could throw a spear really, really well, but we won't get into that. But I think most of us go through these in-between seasons like we're going through right now, and sometimes we experience some spears being thrown at us. Well, you're asking yourself probably like, what the heck does this story of David and spears have to do with me? Well, the quarantine started and all of us were living in this ignorant bliss. We thought it was an extended vacation. Gavin, you were probably on spring break, right? And then you were like, oh, my spring break gets extended. And same for you, Emma, even though you're homeschooled, you're like, I don't have work to do for an extra week, beach days. And so you guys were at the beach having a blast. And then that spear that interrupted your happiness unexpectedly was the CDC telling you that the beaches were closed and that you had to go home. And you're like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. Well, for some of you, you actually enjoy being home by yourself in isolation for a little bit or for at least a season. And I know that for some of our students, that season was really, really great. But you were at home with your mom and your dad was off at work and you had online schooling to do and you were playing video games and you were enjoying the time. And let's be honest, mom wasn't really keeping up with whether or not you were doing your schoolwork. And so you were getting away with just playing video games or binge watching Netflix all day long. Gavin's like, that never happened. Well, the spear thrown at you was probably when your dad announced, I'm coming to work from home, and you could no longer get away with not doing any homework. So that sucks. But your quarantine bliss quickly turned into a real life prison. Well, we want to make sure that we are like David in how we respond to the spears thrown at us or to things that happen in our life that unexpectedly interrupt our happiness, especially in this season of being quarantined or of being in the in-between like we talked about earlier. And so the first way that we look at David's response was David responded by honoring the authority that God had placed. Nice. You were doing so good because you were like twirling it around the knife and then it fell. And then it fell off the knife. Yeah, it's quiet is not happening.
Can you keep it down over there?
But David responded in such a way that he honored the authority that God had placed him under. And he wants us to do the same thing. No matter what happened to David, this man had 2 spears thrown at him. And yet he stayed. At least this time he stayed. We'll look at what he did later on next week. But this time he stayed and he honored Saul. Right? He did what Saul had called him to do. Actually, we look at it in verses 12 through 14. It says, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had left Saul. Therefore, Saul sent David away from him and made him commander over 1,000 men. And David led the troops and continued to be successful in all his activities because the Lord was with him. This man had just gotten through 2 spears thrown at him, and yet he still listened when he was called to lead the army that Saul had called him to lead and honored the authority that God had placed him under. And that's exactly what God is calling us to do. There are going to be days as you're at home and as you're quarantined, if they haven't happened, they will. And if they've happened already, I don't know how you've responded, but we need to respond in respect to our mom and to our dad because it can get tense in a home with people that you're with all day long, the same people, especially your mom and your dad. And sometimes they may not respond or say things in gentleness and in love, and you automatically want to freak out. Well, no one understands your mom and your dad aren't going to throw spears at you. And, so if David can respond in honor, in the authority that God has placed him under, then so can we, no matter how our parents kind of discipline us or respond to us. And so I think that we have a responsibility to honor the authority in which God has placed us under, and then God will honor us as we see that he honored David. Well, now that you guys are done with that portion of cutting. You can go ahead and put these onions in that bowl. And once you're done with your carrots, Gavin, you can put that carrot in this bowl. And the craziest thing is you still have 2 more carrots to cut. So I believe in you. I believe in you. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to check on this beef.
Wait, are you serious? Are you okay?
Wait, did Gavin cut himself? This would be the first time that a student has cut themselves on our show.
Okay, I don't see blood. We're good.
No, I wasn't cutting that.
I don't see blood. We're good. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this excess flour, which is just a little bit. Most of it got onto the meat, to the pot. And then, Emma, those onions that you just put in that bowl, I'm going to take those onions, dear. And I'm going to add them to the pot as well. Are you okay? Did you actually cut yourself?
A little bit.
Sweet
and
lamb.
don't forget at home to take a few leaves from the celery, and you're gonna mince those as well. We're gonna go ahead and throw those in.
So only
add
one
more
onion
flavors.
goes in during the initial cooking process. And once that onion goes in, we're gonna stir it around with that beef in there. That beef or actually, you know what? If you can get your hands on some moose meat, I guarantee that you'll be on the show next week. Yeah, I guarantee you will be sitting in front of Jenae and I next week for the show if you get your hands on some moose meat. Now, while I'm doing this, Jenae, do you want to share the other way that David responded?
Yes.
Awesome.
So another way that we see David respond, and we see this actually a lot throughout his whole life, is in humility. And like we talked about last week, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. Does that make sense? Yes? Yeah? Okay, cool. I know you guys are multitasking, cutting the carrots. So he was humble in every way. And like Miles said, he honored the authority placed ahead of him, even though he had every right to be like, Saul, you're freaking crazy. Like you could have, yeah, you just tried in your house.
Not
and
outside.
Not only that, but understanding that he was already going to be the next king. Like I just want you guys to visualize that you're about to go to before the president, you're going to play an instrument, you're there to like help him calm down, you know, in the midst of all this corona stuff. You're wearing masks, of course, like social distancing, all of that. And then suddenly out of the blue, the president just like, I don't even know, like throws a knife at you. Just like, and you have every right to be like, oh my gosh, like you're crazy. But if you knew you were gonna be the next president, you would have every right to be like, hold up, I'm the next president. Why are you doing this to me? This isn't fair, this isn't right. But instead, David responded in humility to that. And he basically was like, I'm under your authority and I want to respect that. And even deeper than that, we see later on in the story that Saul had this like devious plan that he wanted David to marry his daughter so that in battle, when David marched against the enemy would see him and be like, oh, that's David's son-in-law, like let's kill him. So Saul had this plan of, oh, the enemy will kill David. But David's response to that was, I'm not worthy enough to be related to the king. So it was also in humility. Yeah. And so what we want to encourage you guys to do is in this season of in-betweenness, it's really easy to kind of be really self-focused and be like, well, are my needs being met? I'm bored, I'm this, I'm feeling this way. And so we want to encourage you guys to be humble like David was. And that's looking to the needs of others. Are you looking to the needs of your siblings who are driving you insane and your parents and being like, okay. I was like, I know.
Oh, I want to kill him.
Are you looking to that and trying to meet their needs and serve them and be like, okay, how can I serve? How can I love? Even though this person's driving me crazy, how can I spend time with this person or however, in humility, by thinking less of yourself and more about the people around you.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly right. Well, as we almost are finished with the first part of this meal, Gavin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your carrots that are already cut, because you cut one of them, right? Yep. And then I'm going to take Jenae's celery. She's actually also adding the leaves of the stems of the celery as well. Just a couple of them, not a lot. And so she's adding I'm going to add the celery. I'm going to add the carrots. I'm going to add just a little bit of garlic as well. The recipe doesn't call for it, but garlic honestly makes everything better. And so I'm gonna add the garlic. Yeah, garlic keeps away the vampires. Yeah, because that's a thing. I'm gonna add these carrots. I'm gonna add this celery. And their stems. I keep saying stems. Are they leaves or stems?
The stems are what you cut, and then the leaves are the leaves.
And then you have a little bit of parsley. You have a little bit of parsley and a little bit of thyme up here, just a pinch of thyme. And this parsley, Jenae's actually really proud, is what was grown in her box garden just this last week.
Yes, this is the first fruits from the garden.
Well done. Well done, honey. And then you're going to add 3.5 cups of beef broth. And so once you're done there, you're going to stir this all in.
I got you.
Thank you, dear. I want to make sure everything gets mixed into this. And what's going to happen is this is going to simmer for an hour and 40, or hour and a half, sorry, an hour and a half. Now, before I let this bad boy simmer, I'm going to add a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. Can you hand me the pepper, dear? Thank you. And then I'm gonna... Jenae's making fun of me because I called her a positive
I've
pepper.
never heard that before. I'm a negative Nancy.
And I called myself realistic Roy. So she didn't really...
Because everyone knows someone named Roy and Pepper.
Roy's off The Office, thank you very much. So that's all that matters. So we're gonna put the top on, and we're gonna let that simmer for an hour and a half. Now, thankfully, this one is already simmered, like we said earlier, and this is what it's turned out to be. Now, it just needs a little more for those potatoes and those onions to cook. And actually, once we finish our last point, this should all be ready to go. All right, so we got one more thing that David did that kind of blows my mind in the middle of this chaos, right? David's last response and how he responded in this particular circumstance. So if you can imagine it, this isn't the last time that Saul would throw spears at David in his palace. It was just one of a couple, actually. And so this particular time, one of the last things that David did, which may be difficult for you and I, is embrace the relationships that God had placed around us, or has placed around us. Now, for you and I, that may look a little differently because that's just the people that are in our homes automatically. That's just our immediate family in this season. For David, it was people that he had to trust, that God had purposefully put in his life, because David was taken away from his family and everybody that he knew and that he loved to go and to answer the call that God had put on his life. And so one of the most important relationships for David in this season was with Jonathan. Now, Jonathan was like a brother to David. But what made it even crazier was that this crazy king that had just thrown spears at David was Jonathan's dad. And so this relationship and this friendship began to grow and began to blossom. And the Bible actually says that Jonathan loved David just as much as he loved himself. They were boys. They did everything together. And Jonathan made a covenant with David that he would protect David and that he would care for David. And so David went to him. And I love the text of scripture. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And that's exactly what you see happening throughout this relationship. Is you see iron sharpening iron, you see encouragement happening. And so when David got these spears thrown at him, he goes to Jonathan for help, as a cry, as like, what the heck is going on? What have I done wrong? And Jonathan obviously encourages him and walks with him, and is just a reminder for us that in the season of in between, and when our happiness is unexpectedly interrupted, that we need people in the relationships that God has placed in our life to help us walk through them. right? So we have to embrace those relationships. And so the people that are in your house right now, if you aren't growing and developing and deepening those relationships, you might be wasting your time if those relationships aren't stronger when you come out of this season. And so I know that God is calling us to do that. I know that this time has purpose. And actually, we talk about it all the time in athletics. And you and Gavin, you know this as well. They say, trust the process, right? Or my coach used to say, the process outweighs the event, right? David had this anointing on his life, but God needed him to go through this process to equip him with the tools and resources and people and strengthen his qualities to prepare him for the calling that God had on his life. And I think that this season, we can take advantage of it in that way. If we use this season to allow God to equip us and to grow us and to deepen our relationships and to deepen our faith, then we'll come out of this season more prepared for what God and who God has called us to be. But if we waste it, God may still use us and may still give us and allow us to be who he's called us to be, but we may be ill-equipped. And so how about we allow this season to equip us and allow this season to deepen our relationship with others instead of wasting it away and binge watching Netflix and playing video games all day long. What a great season that we're in. I think that we can take advantage of it. There are people all around the country that are not as privileged as we are. There are people in third world countries that are dealing with the same circumstances from an outward perspective, but they don't have Netflix or they don't have homes or they don't have families to come alongside them and surround them and to love on them. And so how about we allow Jesus to equip us in this season so that when we come out of it, those that aren't as fortunate as we are can be loved on by us because we are the people that God has called us to be. We love you guys at home. We're so thankful for you joining us. We are almost finished with our meal for today, and we're going to serve it up. So make sure that you stay and watch, and we'll get you guys this picture of what we're serving Gavin and Emma today. Potatoes. Nice. That's a good transition. Potatoes. So what's going to happen is this is going to simmer for probably another hour and a half. Well, this one's already done. So we're going to get this one served up for you guys, and then we'll get you eat. All right, we're all ready to go. So let's dish up Emma and Gavin's plate for today. Honey, you want to hand me that bowl? Yeah, I'll take a ladle. Did you call it a Lido?
A ladle.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Fun story, guys. Your knife skills are way better than mine. Miles has made fun of my knife skills for the last 3 years of marriage.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, Gavin cut himself.
He always brushes my knife skills.
Actually, ladies first. Let's do that. And then can you grab them spoons, please?
No, you have to use your hands, guys.
All right, use your hands. Make sure you have enough mousse in there, Gavin. All right, buddy.
All right, thank you.
So there you guys go. There's your beef/moose stew. Hey, we hope it's amazing. If you actually make this, make sure that you take a picture and put it on Facebook or your Instagram story, but whatever you do, make sure you tag TC3 students. And if you do that, we look forward to seeing you on the show right here with Jenae and I next week. We have a blast doing this. Make sure that you join us next week as we talk about how David continues to respond in his season of in-between. We love you guys, and we can't wait till we're able to meet together Sunday at 514 again. Love you. How is it?
I think it's burnt on my taste.
Nice. So you don't know, so you have no idea.